and trying to find the slope. Last time we looked at the slope being the change in y over the change in x. Now we're specifically going to look at the details of what it means by change, and what we mean by change is it subtracts. So when we're talking about slope, we're talking about the differences in y's and the differences in x. Remember that y goes on top and x goes on the bottom. Sometimes people refer to slope as the rate of change. How a problem changes is another way of saying the slope of the line. Now, we have 4 different types of slopes. When the slope is positive, that tells us that the line increases. So the line's going up. We have, if the slope is negative, then the line decreases. If the slope is 0, then that means that it's a horizontal line, and it basically means there's no change, it's staying the same. And if the slope is undefined, that means the line is vertical. So those are the 4 different types of slopes, and those are the 4 different types of lines that we have for linear equations. So by knowing the type of slope, we know basically what type of line it is. The only thing that we're missing is the y-intercept, like where is it starting. So for example 1, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at 3 different lines, and we're going to determine what the slope is. So I'm going to use what we talked about yesterday and just use the change in y over the change in x. And the change in y, if I'm looking at it, it goes down by 2. And then for x, it goes to the right 2. So it's a positive 2. So that means my slope, remember the y goes on top. So it's negative 2 over 2, which is negative 1. So that right there is my slope. Now here I have a horizontal line, and remember, whenever it's a horizontal line, our slope is 0. So automatically I see a horizontal line. I don't need to calculate anything. I know that we have a slope that's 0. In the same way, if I were to see a vertical line, I would know that that slope right there would be undefined. So for letter C, notice that the line's going up, so I know my slope is going to end up being positive. In this case, I'm going to go from one point to the next. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's going up by 5. It goes to the right by 1. So that would be 5 over 1, which is 5. So that's finding the slope when we have a line. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at finding the slope when we just have 2 ordered pairs. So we're going to look at the subtraction. So for the first one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my second y, which is 9, and I'm going to subtract my first y, which is negative 1. And then I'm going to subtract my second x and with the first x. So that gives me 9 minus a negative 1 is 10. And then 4 minus 2 is 2. And that, of course, gives me a 5. Now, after I find the slope, what I'm going to do is describe the direction of the line. So remember, if it's positive, then the line increases. So the next thing I'm going to do is look at letter B. I'm going to use the same slope formula. In this case, I have m equals, I have 3 minus 6 over 1 minus 1. That would be negative 3 over 0, which means that my slope is undefined. If my slope is undefined, then that means that it is a vertical line. Now, looking at letter C, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to find the slope. We're going to go 4 minus 3. And then we're going to go negative 2 minus 2. So 4 minus 3 is 1. Minus 2 is negative 4. So I have a slope of negative 1/4. And usually we don't put the negative in the denominator. It either goes in the front of the fraction or it goes in the numerator. if we're writing it properly. Now that means a negative slope means the line decreases. Pause the video and try letter D and see how you do. So our slope is -8 minus -8. And that would be 0 minus -3. And that would be 0 over 3, which is 0. And that means that it's a horizontal line. Now, technically, the formula is y2 minus y1 and x2 minus x1. But technically, you could switch it around and you could go y1 minus y2 over x1 minus x2. And I want to show that to you in the first example with letter A, just so if you accidentally get the ordered pairs confused, it doesn't matter as long as you're consistent. So in this case, if I did -1 minus 9 and I did 2 minus 4, notice I'm putting my y1 first and then my y2 and then my x1 and then x2. That gives me -10 over -2, and a negative is a positive. So notice that I'm still getting the same slope. So if you happen to switch it up, you don't have to worry about changing signs or anything. It still gives you the same answer. Now, for example 3, what we're going to do is we're going to find and interpret the rate of change. And remember, rate of change is just another way of saying the slope. So what we're going to do is we're going to find our slope. And how we find our slope is we're going to go our second y, which is 158, minus our first one, which is 94. And then we go 8 minus 2. And that right there gives us 64 over 6. I'm going to reduce it. That, of course, gives me 32 over 3. So that's the slope. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to interpret it in each real world situation. So this is time worked in hours, and this is the amount of money earned. So when we're describing it, remember the x value is the independent variable. So that means that the 3 is actually going to go first. So independent means that first you have to work and then you get money. So for every 3 hours, $32 is earned. So whenever we're describing it, what we're saying is that when x is 3, but remember this is slope, so for every 3 x's, in this case hours worked, this is what's earned, $32. Now let's look at letter B and do the same thing. If we're looking at our slope, we're going to go m equals 218 minus 220 over 5 minus 1. That gives me -2 over 4, which is -1/2. So that right there is my slope. Now, when I'm describing it, remember, x is my independent variable. So that's the given. So I have to start with exercising, and then weight loss happens. So for every 2 hours work, 2 hours of exercise, £1. And notice that this is negative, so is lost. So it basically means that if you work out for 2 hours, you lose £1.